If you're a founder planning to sell your company in the next 2 to 3 years, this video can save your deal. Here's a number that should scare you. More than half of M&A deals collapse during diligence, not because of valuation disagreements and definitely not because of market timing, but because the buyer opened the data room and found something that they did not like. An NYU Stern study analyzed 40,000 acquisitions over 40 years and found that about 70% of them failed to meet their objectives. And here's what makes it worse. For Indian founders selling to US buyers, the trust gap starts higher and it cracks faster. I've seen founders build incredible companies over 10 years only to watch the deal fall apart in 10 days because of a messy data room. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 7 red flags that make buyers walk away. These are not theoretical, these are actual things that I've seen kill deals. Hi, I'm Kishore Dasaka and I'm a fractional CFO who advises tech founders. I help companies get their house in order before the buyers come knocking. So if you're anywhere on the path to an exit, stick around because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to put in your data room before a buyer ever sees it. Red flag number 1 is financial inconsistencies. This is the number 1 deal killer. Across every source, every M&A advisors that I've spoken to, this is what comes up first. Here's how it shows up. Your revenue number in the management report do not match with the audited financials. Your EBITDA looks great until the buyer realizes that you've been treating the recurring expenses as one-time add-backs. There was a case where a tech company reported $15 million in adjusted revenue. Sounds impressive, right? But during diligence, the buyer found that $4 million in recurring costs had been excluded. For Indian founders, there is an extra layer. Many companies run cash basis of accounting internally, but present accrual basis of accounting to the buyers. Now, this disconnect between your management reports and your audited financials is one of the first things a buyer will catch. US buyers especially expect GAAP standard financials. And if you're preparing for a cross-border exit, you need audited financials reconciled across accounting frameworks, ideally for 3 years. Remember, we are building a buyer-proof checklist here. Each of these 7 red flags is something you can fix before a buyer ever sees your data room. Red flag number 2, IP ownership gaps. This one is a structural gap, and it is unique to cross-border deals. Under US law, work created by employees belong to the employer. Pretty clean, no complication. But under Indian law, for independent contractors and consultants, the contractor retains the copyright. The company only gets a limited right to use the work, unless you have the paperwork that says otherwise. Now, why does this matter? Think about how your company was built. Your early developers, were they full-time employees from day one, or were they some sort of contractors? Do you have a proper IP assignment agreement with them? And if you used a staffing agency, you'll need 2 layers of assignments, contractor to agency and agency to your company. If either one of those links is missing, then you do not legally own the code that your product runs on. And here's the one that catches almost every Indian startup, the founder IP. If your company started informally, and most Indian startups do, the foundational code was probably written before the formal employment agreement was structured. Now, without a retrospective IP assignment, that code legally belongs to the individual founder, not the company. The other killer, of course, is the open source contamination. If your developers embedded GPL license code into your proprietary product, you could be forced to open source your entire code base. And that is a deal breaker. So how do you fix it? First one is you get proper IP assignments in place. Number 2, you audit your open source usage. Do not wait for the buyer to find these gaps. Now, red flag number 3, tax compliance landmines. If red flag 2 is a trap, this one is a minefield. GST, transfer pricing, FEMA, each one of them can blow up a deal on its own. Let me start with transfer pricing. If you have multiple global subsidiaries or a global parent, you need to file multiple forms under different acts. And most founders ignore this, hoping that the CA is handling this stuff. Here's the most common problem that I see. The transfer pricing policy on paper does not match with what is actually happening. Your Indian subsidiary provides high-value development services but reports below market margins. Buyers and their advisors will flag this in a heartbeat. Oh, and the angel tax. Even though it was abolished for new investments, 70% of Indian startups received angel tax notices in the 12-year regime, and many cases are still pending with the authorities. And the buyers will check for these outstanding notices. That brings us to red flag number 4, missing contracts and documentation chaos. This is the red flag that signals all other red flags. When a buyer opens your data room and sees unsigned customer contracts, missing master service agreements, and verbal client arrangement, they do not see a documentation problem. They assume that you are hiding something. And here's what I mean. A diligence that I was part of a couple of years back, a $2 million deal where the seller could not account for 15% of issued shares, missing shareholder agreements, unsigned board resolutions for equity grants. And what happened? The buyer walked away. Change of control provisions in your client contracts are especially critical. If your contracts require a client consent for an ownership change, then the entire deal is now at the mercy of your client's timelines. For Indian founders, this is a cultural friction point. Because in India, long-standing business relationships run on trusts and handshakes. Verbal agreement with clients, informal deals with vendors, missing board minutes. That is completely normal in India. But US buyers, especially PE firms, interpret it as operational immaturity, or worse, as concealment. The documentation gap is one of the biggest cultural friction points in cross-border deals. Close that gap now. Moving on to red flag number 5, customer concentration. This is the one with the clearest valuation impact, and it hits Indian IT service companies particularly hard. Now, here are the benchmarks. If you have more than 10% of revenue from a single customer, that signals elevated risk. If that is more than 20%, then you are in the high risk zone. And if that is more than 30%, then you're in a severe risk mode and possibly a major valuation haircut. And it gets worse because banks often refuse to finance acquisitions with high customer concentration. So if a buyer has to put up more equity, which means they offer you even less. And I've seen advisors pull companies from the market entirely because customer concentration makes them unsellable at reasonable terms. But for a buyer, that pattern is an existential risk. One contract non-renewal, one change of control termination, and most of the company's value disappears. So start diversifying 18 to 24 months before a planned exit. This is the single highest ROI thing that you can do for your valuation. Red flag number 6, cap table messiness. If you watch my other videos, you already know how important this is. Cap table problems compound across every other red flag. And here's what I see very often. Too many small shareholders, and once you hit 15 to 20 entities on your cap table, getting consents for an acquisition becomes a governance nightmare. With 30 or more individual angel investors, any one of them can delay or block a deal. The other problem, of course, is dead equity. And we have a separate video about this. A co-founder who's left more than 3 years ago but still owns 15%. And they have zero motivation to help you close a deal. And they might even have misaligned incentives. For Indian startups, ESOP complications are brutal. Worst of all, verbal equity promises with no grant letter and no board resolutions. And I see this very frequently. It gives employees no legal standing at all and creates a massive cleanup headache just before a deal comes to a close. Red flag number 7, key person dependency. This is the most universal red flag for founder-led businesses in our range. And this might be the hardest red flag to fix. Here's the test. If you, the founder, are the chief architect of your code base, the primary sales relationship holder, the keeper of pricing strategy, and the only person who understands vendor terms and customer history, you have a key person problem. The valuation impact is severe. EBITDA multiples can drop anywhere between 2 to 5x below industry average. And in extreme cases, the discount approaches 100% of intangible value. Why? Because the business basically has no transferable goodwill. And here's how it changes your deal structure. Instead of getting cash at close, you get earnouts months later. And data shows that earnouts roughly pay 21 cents on the dollar across all deals. So that deferred consideration that you were promised, it's worth a fraction of what you think. Plus, you get locked in for 2 to 3 years, equity rollovers, retention bonuses tied to performance. So what do? Well, you start building the second layer of leadership now. Document your processes, transition client relationship. I know that sounds counterintuitive, But the more replaceable you are, the more valuable your company becomes. Before we conclude, one important point that I'd like to tell you. There's a principle in M&A called the 80-20 rule of information sharing. 80% of material information should be shared before formal due diligence begins. The remaining 20% should just confirm what the buyer already knows. When new revelations come out during diligence, it just doesn't create concern. It destroys trust. And in cross-border deals, trust is already the scarcest resource. And here's the compounding effect. A company with moderate customer concentration and key person dependency and messy contracts faces dramatically worse terms than a company with a single issue. Each red flag multiplies the perceived risk, not adding, multiplying. So there you have it. 7 red flags, 7 things that you can start fixing immediately. If you found this video helpful, share it with another founder who may need it.